Girlfriend's parents paid off my boss to fire me, and I want to start by telling you what I mean when I say I didn't know who they were, because the part about not knowing who they were is not a figure of speech. I spent 4 years having dinners with these people, exchanging gifts at Christmas, attending their family events, contributing to the conversations they invited me into, and believing that what I saw was what was there. I had developed affection for them that was genuine and that I had never questioned because there had seemed to be nothing to question. That when my boss called me into his office on a Thursday morning in February and eliminated my position due to what he described as a company restructuring, I had no connection in my mind between that call and the people I had had Thanksgiving dinner with 11 weeks before. It took 8 weeks, one second employer who withdrew an offer with no explanation, one conversation with a woman named Dana who had been at that second company and had heard something she thought I should know, and one employment attorney named Kevin Morris to connect those things. Once they were connected, everything else I thought I knew about the previous 4 years required reexamination. Let me tell you about the relationship first, because I think it is important to understand what I thought I was in before I tell you what was happening around it. Emily Cole and I met at a conference in Atlanta in the fall of 4 years ago. She was there representing a healthcare consulting firm. I was there for my employer, a mid-sized financial services company in Charlotte. We talked for most of an evening at a networking event that I had planned to leave early and did not. I had her number by the end of it. We had our first real date 3 weeks later, which lasted until 2 a.m, which I believe is the honest signal that something is genuinely working. We dated long distance for the first 8 months while she completed a project in Atlanta. Then she relocated to Charlotte. And from that point, we were fully in each other's lives in a specific way of two people who have decided they are in the same place and are building something. We had a life with real texture. We had the restaurant we went to on Friday nights when neither of us had energy for cooking. We had the Sunday morning run that we had started as a challenge and which had become, through the specific alchemy of shared routine, something we both wanted. We talked about the future the way you talk when the future is something both of you are building toward rather than navigating separately. Emily's parents, Harrison and Carolyn Cole, were prominent people in Raleigh. Harrison had built a regional commercial real estate firm over 30 years that had made him well-connected and financially comfortable in the specific way of someone who has built rather than inherited. Carolyn ran a charitable foundation and sat on 3 boards and knew everyone at every event they attended. They were warm to me in a way that I read as genuine and which I now understand was something else. I want to describe the specific quality of the Cole's warmth toward me because it is important to understanding how completely I missed what was underneath it. Harrison shook my hand firmly every time we met. He asked about my work with what appeared to be interest. He remembered details from previous conversations in a way that seemed attentive. He said, "Good man," once when I described something I had done at work, and I received that as affirmation. Carolyn asked me questions about my family, my background, my ambitions in the tone of someone who is genuinely curious about a person their daughter loves. She remembered things. She followed up. She made me feel known. I understand now that she was taking notes. The first signal came about 14 months into the relationship. Harrison mentioned, over dinner, that he had heard my company's name come up recently in a business context, and that he had some thoughts about it if I was ever curious. I said I was curious. I said I was curious. He gave an opinion that was measured and unremarkable, nothing negative, just the assessment of a man who tracks the business landscape of his region. I did not think about it again for 3 years. The second signal was more visible, and I still missed it. At a family event about 2 years in, I overheard Carolyn telling her sister that Emily had done well to find someone ambitious, but that she hoped he was building towards something real. I heard it and filed it as mild class anxiety and moved on. I did not hear the inventory in it. The third signal was Harrison asking me at dinner about 6 months before the termination what my 5-year plan looked like. I answered honestly I was building toward a senior analyst role. I had a timeline in mind. I was doing well at the company. He nodded. He asked follow-up questions that were precise and specific. I thought he was interested. He was assessing. He had been assessing for 3 years. And whatever his assessment produced, it produced the conclusion that I was not the outcome he wanted for his daughter. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that the assessment had already moved from evaluation to action. The Thursday morning in February when Bradley called me in was ordinary in every way until it wasn't. I had arrived at the office at 8:15, which was my usual time. I had coffee from the machine in the break room, not good coffee, the institutional kind, but the kind you have become accustomed to in the way that you become accustomed to anything you experience 5 days a week for 3 years. I had checked my email, responded to 2 things, started on a project that was due the following Tuesday. Bradley called me into his office at 9:40. The office was corner-facing, which meant it had 2 windows, one facing the street, one facing a courtyard. The street-facing window had a view of the building across from us, which was a glass tower. That reflected the February Charlotte sky in a specific way of glass buildings on overcast days, which is a gray blue that is not quite any color. I had been in that office perhaps 30 times. I had never particularly noticed the reflection before. I noticed it that morning because I was looking at something while Bradley was talking that was not Bradley, which is what happens when your brain is processing something that requires distance from the person delivering it. Bradley said the company was restructuring a division. He said my position was being eliminated. He said it was not a performance issue, that I had been a valuable member of the team, that he would provide a strong reference. He said there would be a severance package. He was efficient and professional and completely without warmth, which I had attributed at the time to the difficulty of the conversation and now understand was the specific discomfort of a man delivering a decision he knew was wrong. He shook my hand. He walked me out. I had my box, the specific cardboard box of a clear desk in my arms by 10:15. I sat in my car in the parking garage. The concrete of the garage had the specific smell of urban parking structures, which is not unpleasant, but it's very specific. And I had been in that garage every workday for 3 years, and I was now sitting in it at 10:15 on a Thursday morning with a box on my passenger seat and nowhere to go. I called Emily. She answered on the first ring. I told her. She made the sounds of shock and sympathy that the moment called for. She said she was sorry, that this was wrong, that I would find something better, that she would be home early if I needed her. I said, I'll be okay. I'm going to start reaching out today. I drove home. I made a list. I started the process. I did not yet know there were people working against that process. The second job offer came 6 weeks later. A financial analytics role in a company I was excited about, better scope than my previous role, better compensation. I had been through 3 rounds of interviews. The hiring manager had called me to say he was preparing an offer letter. The offer letter did not arrive. When I followed up, the hiring manager's tone had changed. He said they had decided to go in a different direction. He would not elaborate. He said it in the tone of someone who has been told not to say more. I did not understand it. I could not explain it. Dana called me 3 weeks later. Dana had been at that company, a former colleague of the hiring managers, and had heard something at an industry event that she thought was wrong and that she thought I should know. She said that at an event she had attended, she had overheard a conversation in which a man named Harrison Cole had told someone that he had significant concerns about me professionally that he had wanted to flag with the appropriate people before I was placed somewhere I could cause problems. Dana said, I don't know who Harrison Cole is to you, but he's using his network to hurt your job search. I thought you should know. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Emily. I said, do you know if your father has spoken to anyone in the business community about me? She said, what? No. Why would he? I said, I need you to ask him. She did. Harrison told his daughter he had heard some things about my previous employer that made him concerned. He said he had mentioned it in passing to a few contacts. He said he was just trying to protect her. Just trying to protect her. Emily called me after that conversation. She said, he says it was just concern. He says he mentioned it to people. I said, Emily, I lost a job offer because someone flagged concerns about me professionally. That's not a mention. She said, I know. I said, I need to talk to an attorney. She said, okay. The night before my first meeting with Kevin Morris, I sat at my kitchen table in the specific way you sit when something large is in motion and you have done everything you can do for the day and there's nothing left but to wait for morning. It was a Tuesday evening in April. The Charlotte spring had been arriving in the specific way it does warm mornings, cool evenings, the dogwoods on the street outside my apartment doing what dogwoods do in April in the Carolinas, which is bloom with an enthusiasm that seems disproportionate to the season, but is in fact exactly right. The apartment window faced west, and at 7 p.m. the light came through it at a specific late afternoon angle that made the kitchen table glow in a way I had noticed before, and noticed particularly that evening because I was paying attention to everything with the specific acuity that comes when you understand that things are about to change. I had a legal pad on the table. I had been making notes, timeline, dates, conversations, every interaction with Harrison and Carolyn that I could recall with any precision, every professional contact, the sequence of the job loss and the withdrawn offer and Dana's call. The legal pad had 11 pages. Not all of it was relevant. But I had learned from this entire experience that you do not know in advance which 11 pages of your life are going to matter. So you write all of them down. Emily had called that afternoon. She said her father had admitted he had spoken to people. She said he was framing it as concern. She said he was not going to acknowledge that concern had consequences. She said, I don't know what to do with him. I said, you don't have to do anything right now. Kevin and I will figure out what needs to happen. She said, I'm sorry my parents are who they are. I said, you didn't know. She said, I should have known. That sentence. It is a question whether she should have known, and I have turned it over many times in the months since. I do not think Emily was complicit in what her parents did. I think she was a person who loved her parents and trusted their warmth and did not look behind it, which is something most people do and which in this case had consequences she did not intend. I cannot be angry at her for that. I can be honest that it cost us things that might not have been costable if we had been looking at the same information. I closed the legal pad at 9:30. I made dinner. I ate it at the table where the pages were. I washed the dish. I went to bed. Kevin was good. I knew this from the first phone call when he had listened to the summary and then asked 4 precise questions that told me he had identified exactly what the case was before I finished explaining it. His first question had been, is there any documentation of the consulting arrangement between Harrison Cole and your former employer? I had said I didn't know. He had said, that's what we're going to find out. Kevin filed a public records request and a civil discovery request simultaneously. The discovery request was for all financial communications between Harrison Cole's firm and Bradley Marsh's company in the 12 months preceding my termination. Bradley's company's legal team responded with a claim of confidential business communication. Kevin filed a motion to compel. The court ordered production. The $45,000 consulting contract was in the production. The contract was dated 6 weeks before my termination. The scope of services listed was strategic consulting and market assessment. The term was 12 months. The compensation was $45,000, front-loaded $30,000 on signing, $15,000 on satisfactory. Completion of engagement objectives. The engagement objectives were listed as confidential per agreement, confidential engagement objectives, on a $45,000 contract, coinciding precisely with the timing of my termination. Kevin called me when he had the contract. He said, I've seen tortious interference cases for 20 years. This is the most documented one I've encountered. I said, what's the path? He said, we file a tortious interference claim against Harrison Cole and his firm. We file a wrongful termination claim against Bradley Marsh and his company. We document the second attempt with Dana's testimony. We let the discovery process run. I said, how long? He said, 6 to 9 months. I want you to understand something. The contract exists. Bradley signed it. Harrison signed it. Those signatures are permanent. Whatever happens next, that document is never going away. I said, good. Harrison's response to the civil filing was to retain a firm with significant local presence and to file a counterclaim arguing that the consulting contract was a legitimate business arrangement, that the scope of services was standard for such engagements, and that OP's termination was an unrelated business decision by my employer. His attorney was well-resourced. The counterclaim was competently drafted. It was the argument available to Harrison, which was essentially, prove the contract caused your termination. Kevin requested Bradley Marsh's internal communications from the 2 weeks surrounding my termination. What the communication showed. An email from Bradley to a colleague saying, Harrison Cole is bringing a lot of value to the firm. I think the restructuring decision makes sense from a partnership perspective. Sent 4 days before my termination. The word partnership. Not restructuring, not performance, not business conditions. Partnership. With Harrison Cole. Bradley's attorney, when presented with the email, asked for time to consult with his client. The consultation took 2 days. When Bradley's attorney called Kevin, he said his client was prepared to cooperate with the plaintiff's case. Bradley became a cooperating witness against Harrison. The settlement was reached 7 months after Kevin filed. Harrison Cole's firm paid $220,000 in settlement of the tortious interference claim, $45,000 representing the value of the consulting contract, plus compensatory damages for lost wages, plus punitive damages for the second interference attempt. Assaulting contract was voided. Bradley's company paid a separate settlement of $75,000 for wrongful termination. Bradley's company also agreed to correct my termination record to reflect involuntary separation without cause. Kevin called me with the terms. I was in my apartment on a Thursday, the same day of the week as the termination, and I sat at the kitchen table where the 11 pages of notes had been, and I looked at the west-facing window and I said, "Is that final?" He said, "Final and documented." I said, "Thank you." He said, "You built a good timeline. You had the right instinct about what needed to be in the file." I said, "I had a good teacher." Emily was at the settlement signing with her own attorney. We sat on opposite sides of the table, not as adversaries, but because we each had separate interests in the outcome. She had retained counsel because Harrison had, at one point in the legal process, attempted to include her in the narrative of his defense in a way that her attorney had correctly identified as problematic. She had responded by retaining counsel. That was the moment, she told me later, when she understood fully what her parents were. After the signing, we had coffee at a place nearby. It was the first time we had been in the same room without attorneys in 4 months. She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." She said, "That's not enough." I said, "No, but it's what's available right now. We are not together anymore. I want to be honest about that." The relationship did not survive what her parents did to it, not because either of us decided it couldn't, but because there was too much in the space between us where trust had been, and which was now occupied by something else. We parted without drama and with a specific mutual recognition of what had happened and what it had cost. 6 months after the settlement, I was at a conference in Atlanta. Not the same conference, a different one, in the same city, which was a coincidence that I noticed and then moved past because coincidences are what they are and not what you make them. I was there in my new role, which I had taken 2 months after the settlement, a senior analytics position at a company in Charlotte that I had found, through a direct introduction from a colleague, without any involvement from anyone named Cole or Marsh. I was at a networking event at the end of the first conference day. The room was the kind of room these events always are, a large hotel space with catering tables along the walls, people standing in conversational clusters. Of 2 to 4, the specific ambient noise of 100 people talking at a volume slightly louder than the one below, which you cannot be heard. I was talking to a woman about a project management methodology we had both encountered when a man across the room caught my attention. I did not know him. He was talking to someone with the specific ease of a person who was comfortable in rooms like this, which was a quality I recognized because it was the same quality I had attributed to Harrison Cole for 4 years. I watched him for a moment. Not suspicious, not alarmed, just observational. He turned at one point and looked in my direction without seeing me, the way you look around a room when you are thinking about something else. And I saw his face clearly. He did not look like Harrison. He did not look like anyone connected to this story. He was just a man at a conference. I turned back to the conversation I was having. I want to tell you what that moment felt like, because I think it is the true ending of this story, not the settlement, not the decision about Emily, not the new job. The specific moment at a conference in Atlanta when a man I did not know looked across a room and I watched him with no fear in it. When the quality of the attention I gave strangers was no longer the attention of someone who does not know what strangers are capable of, but the attention of someone who does know and who has handled it and who is here in this room because of what they built on the other side of the handling. I am not grateful to Harrison Cole. I want to be clear about that. What he did cost me things I do not think can be fully recovered, a relationship that had been real, a period of professional uncertainty that was manufactured rather than natural, a year of my life spent in the specific exhaustion of fighting something that should not have required fighting. But I am grateful for Kevin's 4 precise questions, for Dana's phone call at an industry event when she had no obligation to say anything, for the legal pad with 11 pages, for the consulting contract with Harrison's signature on it, which exists permanently in a court file in Charlotte and which is the specific kind of documentation that does not go away. I gave Kevin's card to 3 people at that conference. Word of mouth. The best referral there is, these are the stories nobody planned to tell. That's why they feel the way they do.